The primary purpose of farming is to provide food and fibre for the population, the largest proportion of that population being in cities. How do we link what happens out in rural and regional Australia with the consumers who largely live in those cities? I'd like to invite Sam Jewell up to the lectern to show how that can be done. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. First of all, I want to say how absolutely, genuinely honoured I am to be standing talking before carbon farmers, because I actually believe you are the solution to the climate. My research spans 14 years, so I've been, or maybe it's closer to 16 years now. So how do I come to be standing here talking to you about this divide and how it could be crossed? Well, the first thing is that I have a fairly unique position in that I was raised in the first family restaurant chain in Australia. So I literally grew up in a restaurant. And as I grew, so did the restaurants. I just want to point out that I am an artist. I make no point about saying I'm a farmer or that I do anything about growing. I believe that's completely your role. But what I have learned in the course of feeding people over a long time, where this story begins, we were up to serving about 50,000 people a week. That's roughly $68,000 worth of raw food coming into the restaurants. And I'm flitting around serving people, not really thinking too much about the effect of this. Then United Kingdom's health minister comes out and says, well, we're going to stop importing any meat from England because we have this thing called mad cow disease. Now, as I pointed out, I don't grow anything, but for me, the concept that someone could feed a cow meat was just extraordinary. So I spoke to my then father, who was running the business, and said, well, what else could they be doing to our food if they're doing this in England, which I had this wonderful view of them being green and loving food and cows, and here they were slaughtering them because they were feeding them not only meat but cow meat. So just to tell you a little bit more about my father, he actually came from 4 generations of wheat farmers in the Midwest, and his family had the rather dire experience of living through the Dust Bowl, which he knew was almost entirely due to the fact that the children of the farming families had gone to university and come back with industrialised farming and the pesticide and chemical knowledge, which was then introduced into the farms and caused tremendous soil erosion and what eventually turned out to be the famine and poverty that occurred with the stock market of the 1930s stock crash. So with the announcement of BSE, it was very clear to him to support me in this. And so I then began a journey of study that took me all over the world, sponsored by my family, and I've literally spent hundreds of thousands of dollars researching. So all of this information was put in, and I would come back to him and I'd say, well, I looked at all of the restaurant's food, I rang everyone, I wrote to them, and I would say, well, I'd like to know what you've got in your food. Have you got any genetically engineered ingredients? Because based on what I've just told you about my father, he was very wary about the genetic engineering going in. So I would write to them and they would come back and say, no, we don't have any genetic engineering ingredients, we just do these things. And I'd say, well, you list sugar, for instance, and I have a document from the sugar board saying they do use a genetically engineered enzyme to extract the molasses, and they happen to dump that in the brown sugar, which everybody sort of being healthy thinks is the healthy thing. And the people would say, oh, I don't know that, can I see that document? So I would send the document back off to them, and this went on for a course of years. And as I was having babies at the time, at around 98 by now, I was having some problems myself, and I'd eaten what I considered a very clean lifestyle and thought, well, what is going into the food? So as this continued, and we found that only the organic paradigm had a paddock to plate protocol that actually knew what was going in all the way along the line, we decided to try and support the organic and biodynamic markets by introducing them into the restaurants. This was to prove extremely difficult because the organic industry is very geared to the small family experience and was not set up to service 50,000 customers a week. So both the staff found it incredibly frustrating to introduce, and the people doing the supply were finding it very difficult. We were still trying to introduce it, and we decided to just get behind one item, and we went with ice cream, which seemed to be the thing that everyone could be really thrilled about. We put $100,000 a year into organic ice cream. So we put the ice cream in, and it was well received, but again, it was really difficult to continue to expand in this area because it was so expensive and we didn't add the cost onto the customer. So I continued to study this research, and about 2004 my father passed away and my brother inherited the business, and he had very different economic viewpoints about continuing with organics, and we kind of went our separate ways, and I continued to do research. And whilst I was at one of these conferences, the then Australian of the Year, Tim Flannery, came out with this rather extraordinary announcement that the organic industry were the single greatest contributors to the solution, being that carbon could be sequestered and that their protocols were really about soil development. And I was like, wow, that's like a revelation. This is like high school biology. I know that plants do that. They take the air and they give us oxygen. Oh, that's what they do with the carbon. Of course, they put it in the soil. And I was like, well, I sort of started to switch my entire focus from just organics, which I'd been plugging away, trying to get markets, trying to develop it because it was proving to be so difficult. I started thinking, well, this is such a global issue. I've got to do something that will support the farmers to actually want to put more effort into putting biological activity into the soil. So I came across in my researches the Keeleys, who I wish to say thank you very much for managing to slip me into your program. I understand how hard that was. Thank you, Louisa. And they gave me the first I happened to buy, just by pure coincidence, with the family's backing, I bought an Australian farm soil credit, and I became the first person in Australia to buy one, which they tell me helped get the government to actually pay notice, and it started the industry of soil carbon trading, because it was a real trade. So here I was doing all this research and came across Christine Jones, again through the Keeleys, directing me into things, and her wonderful comment that it was only a 1.5% increase over 15 million hectares to soak up the entire 8 gigatons. And I was like, wow, that's an extraordinary concept. We could lead the world with this. We're talking about, we do wheat. One of our biggest crops is wheat. We did 13.5 million hectares last year. Just one crop alone, we could solve the entire planet's 8 gigatons of emissions. Well, this is a huge thing. Why can't everyone get behind farmers who would do it if all they need is to be paid more money, because it's so expensive to do the organic protocols because it needs more labour, it needs more time, you have to not use the chemicals. You know, these are difficult things for farmers to change over these farm management programs. So I started thinking, well, how can we bring this initiative to the public? How can we cross this divide between the country and the city? Well, everybody eats, I figure, so everybody's involved, and you have to assume that everybody actually wants to stop the climate issue. So if we all eat food every day, why not eat food that is specifically designed to mend the climate? So I'm launching my initiative because I realise that I really have to help the farmer. This is my biggest thing that I can see has to happen, and I've launched a brand called Climate Food, and my aim is to bring anybody who wishes to be included, to provide markets to specifically sponsor those people that are actually putting biological activity into the soil, because the organic and biodynamic processes are really a paddock to plate protocol, and I'm mainly interested in helping the environment so that we all have an environment to live in. So I see that if there's some way of assisting farmers beyond these fairly limited protocols, and even I understand you're all working towards things that will give you money for carbon trading, but it's really about whole farm management that is really about helping the environment. And I know from the many farmers that I've spoken to that you're actually really very keen to do that, which is why I'm so supportive of you. So who would have imagined that we could basically eat the solution? My role has been about educating the public and creating that connection. So I'm really committed to that through these books that I wrote. So the first book, Elegant Solutions, it's basically my journey through these last 14 or 15 years of how I came about understanding all this. Getting the definition of food, how food is valued, why we're starving ourselves fat, providing activities to enable participation, eating organically, composting, worm farms. It's really much the stuff that you've seen and everybody knows about in this room, but it's much more for the layperson. The idea was that it was to make a very complex science simple for the average person to feel that they had some way of being empowered, because the thing that I found through talking to the schools and going in and presenting, basically I was championed by the headmaster who did his thesis on climate change 37 years ago, and he was very enthusiastic that I bring it into the private schools because they had some access. And I found that teachers on the coalface of teaching said the kids are scared because all they ever hear through the media is it's doom and gloom, it's all over. And I did a lot of promotion, brought people out and marketed all over everywhere. And it was very genuinely, it's too late, it's all over. And I still hear this, a lot of depression out there. And I feel that we have to give people hope that we actually can resolve this. And it doesn't have to be as bad as everybody's saying if we actually support farmers, which is why I'm standing here saying this is what I'm about. So I took the story then even more into the children's venue, and I created these two characters. This guy over here is the aerobic bacteria, and this guy's the anaerobic bacteria with a virus on him. Because basically the conventional processes were squashing the soil and taking out the air. So I was trying to say this is a journey, and they have a battle that goes on, and this little girl comes along and she saves the day with a bit of magic and communicates and brings it all alive, and they resolve the, like it's a kid's story. Basically it's taking a very complex story and bringing it into a 10-year-old's vernacular. And then I engaged an artist to help me make that even simpler, and I did the same story for 5-year-olds. So I have these 3 books for these different markets to try and communicate a very simple concept that really is what you guys are already doing, and I understand that you're doing that. So I'm really not trying to tell you anything about this other than what I'm doing to help support you. So this is where I'm asking that I actually still need your support, so I invite you to become a part of this movement that I'm creating. And if you'd like to visit my website, samjulda.com, if you put your name in your email, I will send you, as a part of the delegation, a copy of any one of the books you want to nominate that you'd like. You might have a kid that you'd like to read one of the books to, their ebooks. So I was trying to avoid cutting down trees. And in the main book, there's lots of live links and videos to where my research comes from. This is my Facebook page. You can join if you'd like to. I've got about 9,000 people following me now, so if you'd like to be part of that, I'd love to have you be part of the community. Thank you.
I think that because we're running a little late, if you'd like to learn more about Sam's initiative, you can track her down during the breaks.
He's insisting.
Oh, he's insisting?
Well,
he's
domestic,
insisting.
you know.
Oh, sorry. I wanted to explain what Australian Farm Soil Credits were. Might have surprised some of you that there was that was the first transaction. I was having a meeting in 2005 with John Laurie and Brian Murphy, and I'd been told by everyone that we'd spoken to there was no interest in soil carbon credits. No one wanted to buy them. So I put up a website and I made them available. And Samantha was the first person. We had several others and then we shut it down. But I was able to go to that meeting and say, gentlemen, the Australian market for farm soil credits opened this morning at 2:30 a.m. And Truck said, well, these people are in trouble, we better help them. And that was the beginning of the Carbon Coalition, the alliance between farmers, ratbags and scientists that got us all involved. And it was through this lady, through the first stone into the pool. And so I'm very grateful for that, and that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.